Hello and welcome to the MLB DFS on the RotoRadar podcast. My name is Joshua Riemer. I'm joined by none other than the man, the myth, the legend, Jared Block. We are back for another day of MLB DFS. Yesterday started off pretty well. Today we have a whole new slate. Only 5 games on the docket. Feels a little bit weird to have such a small slate after having such a big slate yesterday. But Jared, how are you doing? How did you enjoy opening day?
I really enjoyed it a lot. Thankfully, I was able to enjoy some other teams playing because the Brewers didn't seem like they knew what opening day was yesterday. But yeah, got to enjoy some. I kind of said it on the podcast yesterday, but the Baltimore Orioles, man, team of destiny in 2022, 2023. Lots of really good games yesterday. We saw the incredible home run from Aaron Judge right off the bat, the Hunter Renfroe catch late at night, the amount of stolen bases that was different from last year. I mean, things are going to be huge for the next several weeks here as the new rules get implemented. And, you could argue that the Boston Red Sox lost a game because of a rule change. And that's kind of how that went.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely a fun day of baseball. It was fun to see how those new rules got implemented, and it's going to be even more fun to see more baseball today. So we have a 5-game slate on the docket. Like I mentioned, a little bit less games than we're used to, especially on a Friday. Friday's usually the big day of the week, but everyone played yesterday. Now a whole bunch of teams, I think, are traveling. I don't think everyone's playing like their opening series for that first day. Yeah, lots of travel. A travel day for a lot of the leagues. So only 10 teams on the docket, but we're going to talk about all 10. Talk about what we like from a DFS perspective. Talk about what we like from a props perspective. And let's get into this thing, man. We're starting off early, a little bit earlier than we're used to at 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it's the Mets and the Marlins.
Yep, 2 pieces of housekeeping. First one, the DFS slates lock at 6:40 p.m. Eastern Time, so about a half hour earlier than normal. And then second, see people are starting to trickle in here. Guys, if you are watching us live right now and you're interested in asking questions or want to chat, feel free to say what's up. Feel free to ask questions. We're watching the chat, monitoring everything. And if you're on and watching through Discord, just if you have a YouTube account, you can comment on the stuff, and we can go from there and answer any of your questions along the way. So feel free to say what's up. It's Friday. Happy Friday. And let's get into this thing now with the Mets and the Marlins. Right now, the Mets are minus 112 on the money line as the road favorite. The Marlins, the minus 104 underdog. The pitchers for this game, Peterson for the Mets. Marlins is Jesus Luzardo, former Angel. Total is at 8, which you're going to see that there are a lot of totals today. Very, very similar. It's going to be a lot of low totals once again because of these studs. So let's go ahead and talk about this game. The Mets ended up winning yesterday. Max Scherzer not getting he kind of faltered in the later half, and the Mets kind of gave up and started, and they barely squeaked it out here. So first things first, Peterson, really respectable K rate numbers, but we also saw this Marlins team be a little bit, what's the word I want to use? Fickle, I think, is the best word. So how are we going to, what does this game mean from a pitching perspective? Let's start with the Mets side here.
Yeah, we can start with this Mets side. Luzardo, I'm going to make a little bit of fun of you, was never an Angels pitcher. Was a pitcher for the Athletics way back in the day.
Sorry, that's what I meant.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I understand. I thought it was funny. Anyway, yeah, I think the Luzardo spot is actually pretty solid in all honesty. I mean, this is a lineup against a pretty lefty-heavy team. They got Nimmo on the other side. We already have this starting lineup, too. Great part of baseball is that we get these pretty early. So we know that Nimmo's going to be in the 1 hole. We know McNeil's going to be in the 6 hole. So you already have some lefties on this team. I worry a little bit about the fact that he was a lot worse at home than he was on the road last year. So those home road splits definitely do come into play. And I think the Luzardo spot is solid. I think it's a little bit too expensive for him at this point in the season. Putting him all the way up at 9,100. Prize Picks only has him projected for 5 strikeouts. I would say it's a pretty accurate projection, all said and done. And I don't think I'm all that interested in this spot for Luzardo. I'd love to hear your thoughts and see if you're any different from me in that regard.
Yeah, not really. I just think that this is a spot where, I mean, DraftKings, the conversation comes into play of whether or not, how low do you want to go in terms of guys on the slate for an SP2. I think there are a lot of guys around him that are ways that you can get exposure to that kind of play. and it just doesn't feel like a necessary prop to target. So I'm definitely off on that one. But yeah, I think that in terms of trying to get different, you're trying a little bit too hard with the Luzardo stuff.
I would agree. Probably trying a little bit too hard with the Luzardo stuff. I think there's better ways to get different on this slate. We'll talk about some of those later, but Luzardo doesn't feel like that guy that you really want to target today. Talk about David Peterson on the side. What do you think about Peterson? Not the number 2 pitcher that we expected for this Mets team, but it's the one we get.
Yeah, definitely. So the one thing that I would be at least raising as a first thing here, um, I'm not like we can. He is a very, very strong and solid pitcher. The one thing that I want to raise to you though is how ready is he going to be with routine? How ready is he going to be with getting called up a day early, essentially, maybe 2 days early, right? So that's that on that front. But in terms of like actual stats, I think that you can make some solid cases for him today. The K rate from last year is 27.9%. Very, very strong play against lefties, limiting hard contact to both handedness, has good ground ball stuff. Very, very good swinging strike rate of 12.9%. So I think that you can come into some things here. Again, some of these Marlins guys have low K rates. The Yuli Gurriels, the Luis Arias's, the Gene Seguras, basically all the guys that they traded for or got in free agency this year. Everybody else is kind of free swinging. So I could see there being upside here. And I think that I guess another just a worry in terms of DFS is that he's not going to be able to, and I guess props too. Like, I mean, the leash could certainly be a factor here. The money line definitely being a concern. So there are ups and downs for Peterson.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely some concern around that. Like you're going to him a day early. It wasn't a for sure thing that they were going to go to him a day early, and now all of a sudden you are. I feel like that's definitely a mentality switch that you had to have as a pitcher, and might throw off your routine a little bit. Peterson's a guy where you mentioned it. The swinging K rate is there. He is just a little bit questionable with his walk rate. There's not a lot of guys who are going to walk heavily on this team, so I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue for him today. It's not like there's a lot of great hitters on this team when they face off against lefties. A lot of high ground ball rates all the way around, not a lot of hard contact. I mean, you have Cooper, Soler, and Garcia all over 40%, but that's about it. After that, you don't have many guys that are generating that hard contact. And in fact, you have a lot of guys that are generating pretty soft contact. So I could see this being a spot where Peterson ends up coming through. In terms of props, really like this K rate or really like this pitcher strikeout at 5. I think he can either push it or go over it. There's a few lefties in the lineup that I feel like he'll have a pretty easy time with. There's a few righties in the lineup that seem like they're pretty free swinging, like Cooper, like Soler, like a Garcia, and feel like he can take advantage of that. So I don't mind the Peterson play. On FanDuel, you're getting him priced pretty low at 8,300. I feel like he is a definite option if you're not wanting to pay up for one of the studs.
Yeah, I think that he qualifies as a guy that I'd be interested in, especially, I mean, like 6,600. Geez, like that's crazy on DraftKings. I think that he definitely can make a case for an SP2. I would say let's keep going back to the Peterson conversation as a really nice comparison point. That's, I think, kind of applies on both sites in terms of FanDuel and DraftKings. I will say that there are probably just, again, does feel a little bit like a reach because when you're talking about props, you're not the only person you're going up against is the book itself. So does feel like you're going a little bit out of your way to do that. But if you want exposure to Peterson through props, we don't mind some of that stuff.
I wouldn't mind taking the under on hits allowed. This Marlins team was one of the worst teams in spring training when it came to hitting against lefties. They were second worst in the league with their average. So, you can't bank on spring training stats for everything. I think you can bank on them for some things. And I think overall you're getting a pretty good sample size with what they faced off against in spring training. So, certainly don't mind going to this hits allowed prop instead of anything else for Peterson.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk bats here because I guess we'll just start with any Marlins bats against Peterson. I think you can make cases for one or two guys here, but it's not something that I'm super encouraged about. The one guy that does do pretty well against him, which is going to be featured in my BVP article today, is Gene Segura. The low strikeout rate does help in his favor. The hard contact rate not the greatest thing, but he's not really a hard contact rate kind of guy. He's actually pretty solid in the medium percentage contact rate. But in terms of that, I mean, I'm not going out of my way to roster any of these guys in props or DFS. It doesn't feel like it's something that's going to make much sense.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I don't think I'm really interested in anyone in terms of taking Segura, or I will say the price tag's a little bit enticing over on FanDuel. Like getting him at
Huh.
2,300 does make sense. But that's about it. I mean, I'm good. Jonathan said seeing people chasing under Case for Peterson, the prop was originally 5.5. I don't understand that. I mean, I know this Marlins team wasn't striking out against lefties all that much in spring training, but this is a different opponent that you're facing. Like the guys that you're facing off in against spring training usually aren't going to be the most elite K guys. You might get lucky in terms of not getting a lot of hits, but you're facing an elite strikeout pitcher. At least when you go back to his numbers last year. The only reason I could see that under hitting for his Ks is because potentially a shorter stint for him in terms of how long he's going to pitch in this one.
Right. I think the case for Segura hitting in the 2 hole today at 2,300 is definitely viable. I would also say that just, and maybe this is just a FanDuel conversation, but uh, we have some really good third baseman plays today. And
Yeah.
he might make your utility spot, or he might be the third baseman, and then you can play another third baseman at your utility spot. DraftKings, you at least have the flexibility to get him to second base. But yeah, I think if you're going this direction, it's probably because you're paying up a pitcher or you're just loading up on some really expensive stacks today.
Yep, for sure. All right. Anything else? Let's talk about Mets really quickly, I guess. I'm not really interested in that many Mets hitters today. I like Pete Alonso in the spot that he's in. He has done okay against Luzardo in the past, 2 for 11, 1 home run. Main thing I'm focused on though is the spring numbers that that Alonso put up. Only had 37 at bats or 32 at bats, I think, but had 4 home runs. Was crushing the ball in the spring. So if he's feeling good coming into opening day, not opening day technically, but opening week, I'm excited for the play, and I think that he definitely has the potential to take advantage of those Luzardo home and away splits that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think that I don't mind the Alonso stuff. I think that you can potentially target guys that don't have high K rates that could potentially take advantage of the hard contact rate given up by Luzardo. I mean, the specialty guys like the Mark Cannas. I think that you can make cases for some of them, but again, this is a team that I'm curious to see what the Mets do when they face off against a lefty, because we know how many lefties they have on their side that can rake. So maybe we go back to an Eduardo Escobar type of situation, but the K rate's a little bit high there. So I think it's like a Canna, maybe a Lindor, and those are more GPP plays.
Yep, I would tend to agree. All right. Anything else in this game, Jared? If not, let's move on to the next one.
Nope. Let's move on to the next one. This second game is going to be at 8:10 p.m. Eastern Time. It's the Chicago White Sox and the Houston Astros. Right now, the White Sox are a plus 124 underdog on the road. Lance Lynn suiting up for them here in day two. The Astros minus 146 at home. Christian Javier takes them out here. Over under set at 8. And then, yeah, I just want to start. I think we start with the Lance Lynn side and talk about him going up against this Astros team. I know that Dylan Cease had a pretty good outing yesterday. I feel like there's spots where I know Houston is a little bit weakened with no Altuve in the lineup, but it does feel like a spot where Houston can take advantage of this today. So I'm a little bit more off of Lynn. And I know that he's got some solid stuff to bring to the table, but I do think that he could get roughed up in the spot a little bit. So where I would be focused on is probably probably I'm just kind of I'm deciding whether or not I want to go with a one-off situation or go with two lefties. He's going to be able to get to some of these righties here, and I think that's first the conversation should start with Yordan Alvarez and his probably the highest contact rate against right-handed pitching in especially on this slate, if not the whole league. So let's start with Alvarez, Tucker, and then anything else you want to talk about with these righties.
Yeah, for sure. Lynn just looked okay. I wouldn't say he looked bad. I wouldn't say he looked great in spring training. So this is certainly a spot where I think Houston could end up getting to him. he's kind of just not anyone. He doesn't really favor one way or the other. Last season, when it came to his splits, I mean, he gave up a little bit more power to lefties. He struck out lefties a little bit less. So I think the Jordan play is always okay. There's definitely upside there, and I definitely don't mind that spot. I think there's also upside in the Kyle Tucker play. I think both of these guys could end up getting to him. And I think I'm fine with just taking a high priced one off or a mini stack of Tucker and Jordan. And that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I respect the Lynn play enough, especially because the Astros are so dependent on these righties in their lineup that I think that the lefties are the only thing I can get behind. Could this be an issue moving forward with the lack of lefty depth?
Yeah, a little bit. I think so. I don't think they have a lot of guys on this bench that are going to be able to fill that lefty def. And usually it's kind of like, yes, it's an issue, but like Altuve does a really good job of hitting against righties. So when they have Altuve in the lineup, it gets a lot easier. But they're going to be without Altuve for quite a bit. So I could see
Yep.
this lefty def definitely being a problem. I'm wondering if they have anyone in the minor league that they can bring up, or maybe they acquire some lefty depth, but we'll have to see.
Yep, I don't mind the 1.5 hits, runs, RBIs line for Yordan Alvarez. Could also be a situation where maybe you're playing the prize pick side, and you also want him to get walks because obviously hits, runs, RBIs, that's not going to count there. So he has a 7.5 hitter score on prize picks, and then on underdog fantasy it's 8.5 um, because of the new scoring system, or with the not that we're expecting him to steal bases, but that's a little bit overinflated more on that site. So I don't mind again the 1.5 hits plus runs plus RBIs. He was the only one to score on his team yesterday, and he was the only one to really actually do well.
Yeah, for sure. This team was. It's definitely gonna be interesting to see how this lineup ends up working out without Altuve for a long time. So, um, yeah, I think that's it. If you wanted to, you get Jeremy Pena at the 7 hitter fantasy score. Again, we're banking on stolen bases as much as we can, and I
Yeah.
feel like if I remember correctly, I'm gonna look at some sprint speed stuff, but I feel like Pena's in general a pretty fast player. Let's see. Yeah, 31st. His sprint time is 31st in the MLB. When you take into account that there's 9 guys playing for each and every team, being 31st considers you a top 10% runner. So Pena, definitely a guy that I could see being a stolen base type of candidate. And against Lance Lynn, again, we're looking to target these guys that are not throwing a ton of gas, going to throw, in the mid to low 90s. And Lance is typically one of those guys. So I could see Pena factoring into the stolen base equation, and getting him at 7, I feel like is a pretty solid spot for prize picks. So 7
Yeah.
fantasy score, number that I like. Even we'll take him in DFS. Actually, let's see price tag before we say that. But I feel like even in DFS, yeah, 2,900, I'm willing to take him as long as he's high up in the lineup, which he should. He should hit leadoff.
Absolutely. So I think that's kind of it on the Houston side. I will at least bring up that, again, this is not going to be one of our featured plays today, but I think that Lance Lynn over 5.5 strikeouts is somewhat in play because of the lineup, or depending on what the lineup looks like. If it's a lot of righties, then I think you can feel pretty good. If it's like 6 or more righties for the Astros, you have a lot of high K guys in the middle of that lineup, or projected middle of that lineup. So we'll see how it goes there. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I'm not too stoked to roster anybody else on that team. So on the Chicago White Sox side, we're gonna have Framber Valdez, or sorry, not Framber, Christian Javier come in here, and the biggest thing that I wanted to start out with in this conversation is that on FanDuel they jacked his price up to the most expensive pitcher on the slate at 10,100, and then on DraftKings he comes in, and it seems like DraftKings does this a lot. They did it a lot last year. He is priced at 8,200, which is good for the 5th highest priced pitcher on the slate. So let's talk Javier, man. It's time. I know we rostered this guy a lot last year, and then we were very sharp on fading the spot when it got to be a little bit overpopular.
Yeah, man. We were kind of early to the spot, and then we were able to hop off at just the right time last year. So it felt
Yep.
good to attack this Christian Javier spot at all the right times. In this spot where he's a favorite, the over is 8. I definitely don't mind going here. I think there certainly is upside, and I really think that there's a good chance that they let him run deep and let him try to get up into the 90s, potentially with that pitch count. So you're getting a high price tag at 10K. I feel like I'm probably attacking another pitcher on this slate that I like a little bit more at the price tag, but the upside is certainly there for Christian Javier. And I think against this White Sox team that I don't know. I've been on the fence if they're going to deliver or not, if they're going to be like an actual team that we have to worry about in terms of their offense. But just going off of last year's statistics, it's not really a team you have to worry about. So I could see Javier picking up here and having a pretty solid outing in terms of just striking out a lot of guys.
Yeah, I could certainly see that. Um, we know that he has some points of his game where it's not the greatest in terms of giving when he fails, and he usually ends up being pretty streaky. So I would say he's the more just to compare the unreliable version of Spencer Strider. I think is a good comparison because the upside's certainly elite. But I think that's in this spot. I mean, it's pretty hard not to be like the best or favorite SP2 on DraftKings.
I think Spencer Strider is the unreliable version of Spencer Strider, in my opinion.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, I can get behind it though. There's definitely some home run risk. He had a really good spring though, so like I'm not necessarily concerned. The K rate was a little bit questionable in the spring. Other than that, though, he limited the home runs, which is the biggest thing you want to see from him. And he kept the control pretty concise, only allowed one walk over 11 innings pitched. Yeah, I think the Javier spot is solid. Do you like any hitters against him? I mean, when I think of speed and I think of guys who can steal bases, I think of Tim Anderson. And so
Mhm.
there was all this talk coming into the season how he keeps saying how he feels so much better and he feels like he's loving the game again. You get him at a fantasy score of 6.5. There's someone Josh in the chat says he likes Andrew Vaughn's fantasy score of 5.5 and going over that. Give me your thoughts on both of those.
Yeah. First, I'd like to see where Vaughn is in the lineup to feel better about that spot. But we know Tim Anderson's going to be probably leadoff man for this crew today. So I definitely think that can be something you take a look at. If Vaughn's in the 7 hole, I just don't know how much upside there is there. But again, beggars can't be choosers in that scenario. So we'll see. I don't mind the Vaughn stuff, but I think that again, you'd be kind of going out of your way to roster a White Sox team when there are other plays on the board that are much better.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, I think the steal spot is so good for Houston because Yasmani Grandal is the pitcher. Lance Lynn, a guy who's routinely in the low 90s. Yasmani Grandal has one of the worst pop times in the MLB when it comes to throwing to second base. So I like the steal spot over there. The problem is over here, like Martin Maldonado, while he is not a hitter
Very
whatsoever,
good
he,
defensive.
he
Yeah.
is one of the best defensive catchers in the MLB. And then you have Javier, who's consistently in the high 90s when he's throwing his heat. It's going to be hard to get those steals. So I wouldn't be surprised if the White Sox are a team that don't end up getting a lot of steals here. But yeah, I certainly I think it's okay to go to Tim Anderson if you wanted to, but that's probably the only guy I would mention here. I don't think I have interest in anyone else. And if you're ready to move on, I am, and we can move on into this next game.
Final thing I wanted to say about the White Sox is that again, feels like you are going out of your way. So they're off the prop market for me, but in DFS, they can be a winner go home first or last kind of spot if Javier has a bad day. They'd be very, very low owned if you had that stack.
Yep, for sure.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on here. Got the third game on the slate. Rockies Padres. Rockies plus 164 on the road as the underdog. Padres minus 196 at home, which is tied for the biggest favorite of the slate. Total sits at 8 here with a lean towards the under. We have Kyle Freeland going up against Nick Martinez. And I guess the first thing I want to mention is people, and including myself, forgot that the Padres just cannot beat these Rockies team. They just can't.
Yeah. I know a lot of people who have forgot that fact. We mentioned some names earlier today too, so that was fun. Yeah, this is going to be interesting. You have two pitchers who aren't necessarily of the highest regard when it comes down to things. Nick Martinez was very middling last year, had a 4.5 xFIP, K rate in the 20s, had a kind of high walk rate. Kyle Freeland was really bad, but you can kind of throw in the fact that that was a lot of cores. He did a lot better on the road. So it'll be interesting to see how he does in Petco, especially against this Padres team that, I don't know, looked a little icy to me last night. Didn't necessarily look like the best team that we all expected them to be. I want to talk about Freeland. I feel like he's a cheap option that I'm willing to get behind. And I maybe my memory isn't serving me correctly, but I feel like he's done well against this team several times last year when he was on the road. So let's talk about Freeland. What do you think about the spot against this Padres team? And do you think he's playable?
Ugh, it's certainly on the scarier side of plays today, in terms of just, if you're buying into San Diego being one of the best lineups in the league, there's that. I mean, but he does get a huge bump up in terms of park factor and in terms of the weather. We don't have much weather on the slate at all, but one thing we do know is that the wind is blowing in from left field today. That will help quite a bit. I think that's, when you take a look at the numbers, the raw data, you would expect people to target the Padres, and I don't disagree with that. I would have to be I would like to hear the historics on that front. I mean, you can obviously make the case that he would be an interesting SB2 option. I mean, both of these guys on the mound today are pretty cheap on DraftKings, so I think that you can make cases for them. It's just, I think that when you're looking at the data, it's tough because the K rate's under 20%, swinging strike rate's under 10%. The ground ball rate is good, but it's not the greatest, and the hard contact is pretty equal to both handedness at 45%. So
Yeah,
there are
so
definitely scenarios where I think he could get blown up, but also do well.
Yeah, so I was looking for a prop to find out if I can attack anything here because I think I'm interested, but it doesn't look like we're going to get anything for Kyle Freeland. Just tells me that the books are scared because both of
Yeah.
the games against the Padres last year at in Petco, 38 FanDuel points, went 5.2 innings with 7 strikeouts, and then 31 FanDuel points where he went 6 innings with 2 strikeouts. No, 3 strikeouts. Sorry, both wins. Both very good games in terms of what you're getting for the price tag here. So I knew I was right on that historic side. When they were in Colorado, he gave up a combined 15 earned runs over a span of like 13 innings. So it certainly wasn't good for him when he faced off against this team in Coors, but he clearly likes having a better park to pitch in. And I think that this is something that I'm willing to go for, especially on the cheaper side for an SP2. I like the Freeland spot, man. This is for those who don't know, for those who are new viewers to the show, new viewers to the MLB product, this is like my specialty is like picking out these pitchers not a lot of people go to that are super cheap that look like they're in bad matchups and getting them in the right spots. And I feel like this is the right spot for Freeland tonight.
If you're bullish on the spot, we have a 3.5 strikeout number on underdog.
Oh,
So
give it to me.
there's that. I think that's in consideration. However, we know that he can just do really, really well and then not get the strikeouts. So there's
Yeah.
always that too. But with this team, the way it's constructed now, it does get a little bit tougher. I mean, I wrote this specific piece up in my batter versus pitcher article about 5, if not 6, of these guys that are going to be in the projected lineup for the Padres have a K rate less than 20%. And if he's not going to have too much swinging strike rate stuff above 10%, and the K rate itself is not the greatest, sure, he can have himself a day, but I feel like the strikeout number can be iffy. But yeah, I think that enough about Freeland for right now. I think we can probably take a look at some of these Padres hitters because they are going to come in as a popular stack today. They are they opened as the highest implied live team total, and then they currently have the highest. But it is something to say. I mean, it's probably weather related, but they opened at 5.3, and now they are at 4.5. Are the San Diego Padres? So at least something to mention there. And also just something that has already been given out for free today, and probably a lot of people are on this, but Manny Machado completely owns him in Kyle Freeland. So let's start with the Padres here and how interested you are for DFS.
Yeah, I think there definitely is. There has to be some interest in this team. There's definitely some high upside. Even if you don't like how they do against Freeland, they're going to get to attack this bullpen as well. I think if I'm going to take anyone on this team, I'm trying to think of exactly who I'd want. Manny's definitely okay. I know the BVP is there for Manny. Um, outside of that, I'm not going to be overly exposed to this Padres team. I think you have a really good team in the Dodgers in the late night window. We kind of already talked about some guys that we like throughout the rest of the slate. I could definitely see this being a slate where there's not a lot of stacks, taking maybe a mini stack
Yeah,
approach and some one offs from some teams is definitely okay today. Again, like I think a one off on this team would be totally fine. Uh, yeah, I think that's it. I'm not going to have a lot of exposure here to this team, and I think a one-off approach like a Manny Machado is certainly okay.
for sure. All right. Yeah. So I think that I agree with you on the full stacking stuff. And, it might. I know we were able to do what, a 4-2-1-1 yesterday.
Uh huh.
And I think that this is a situation where it's gonna be harder to do like a 3-3-2 kind of thing, which is where we would typically like to be. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's there, and that's again why guys like Gene Segura, like we mentioned before, are gonna pop a little bit more. So, that's that on that front. But I think that these Padres are just so loaded that eventually they should, in theory, do very, very well. But it kind of just depends. Like these Rockies pitchers are just, they always seem to show up in the spot, and the park factors definitely support that.
Yeah, for sure. Mark Cunningham said, "New here, boys. What's up? Hope you're doing well, man." He said, "So FanDuel line reserves mainly cash, and you can do a GPP like a hybrid." Thanks for taking time to respond. Yeah. So the way we usually operate, the way we have operated in years past, is 80% of your bankroll that you're playing on that day should be played in cash, 20% in GPPs. Gives you that upside in case we do have a slate breaking type of night to take down some shit, but also covers your entries in case you end up losing on the GPP side. So 80% cash, 20% GPPs. If you ever have questions about DFS, you can go to the free section on rotoradar.bet. You'll see my MLB DFS playbook where I talk about all the things I find it absolutely important to MLB DFS. Also talk about some bankroll management as well. Dan also says that it's Kenya. I don't know exactly where he's referring to or where you said it wrong, but
Oh
I
yeah,
I love that
no,
we're getting
I know.
pronunciation
That's
corrections already on the
understandably.
stream. Yeah,
It's
I
understandably.
figured. I
It's
figured.
I completely forgot, and that's my bad, Dan, because I definitely said Canna and where it's Kanya. So, yeah, definitely will. There's a couple of them in there that we're probably going to mess up in this first week. So I'll try to
Yeah,
remember which ones exactly piss him off the most.
yeah. Just so you
Anyway,
can say
though,
it.
last thing I want to mention on the Padres. Xander Bogaerts looked the best on his team in his debut with this team. 3 for 4 with 2 doubles, and basically was the only spark of the offense for the entire game yesterday. So they signed him for a reason. I actually think that he could be he could be the best hitter on the team right now.
Yeah, I can get behind it. I think it's solid. Really quickly, I feel like we do have to talk about this Rocky side because they did have a pretty good
Yes.
swing of things. Charlie Blackmon, before coming into yesterday, was 3 for 39 on opening day. Had 3 hits yesterday alone. He was a stud last night. So I have a lot of interest in this Charlie spot, man. If he's coming in feeling hot, and we know he's a guy when he does end up getting hot, he's a dangerous hitter. We also know that there's going to be a lot of upside with the steals when it comes to Charlie Blackmon. So I don't
Mhm.
mind Charlie. I think the spot is solid for him. You get him at 2,700. I think that's good. It's also a really good environment for these speedsters in San Diego. So while it is not a home run friendly park, it is a triple friendly park because of how big this stadium is. When you get balls into the gap, it just takes a lot longer for those outfielders to end up getting to those balls. Gives you more time to run around the bases. You tend to see a lot of triples in Petco. So Charlie Blackmon could definitely have that upside today. And yeah, I think Blackman's the only guy I'm going to mention. I know Crone had 2 home runs last night. I think you could potentially go there, but I'd much rather attack the I'd much rather attack the platoon spot with Charlie.
Yeah, I Charlie's on my BVP list. Other than that, I'm not super interested in anybody else. Lifetime Blackman is 5 for 12, and he's has 2 singles, 2 doubles, and a home run. So there's that. But yeah, Echo wants to know Xander 1.5 hits, runs, RBIs. I think that you can definitely go with that, and obviously him being at the top of the lineup is going to help when getting that the runs part of that conversation. So if he gets on and scores from Machado later, there's your bet in the first inning.
Yep, for sure. All right. Anything else here, Jared? If not, we can move on into the second to last game of the slate.
Yeah, I just last final thought on this on DraftKings for DFS. Are you making it imperative to roster one of these guys at the SP2 position today?
No, I don't think so. I think you can go Peterson at SP2 and feel fine about that. So I'm not going to make it imperative, but I think there definitely is upside to it.
Yep, for sure. All right, let's go ahead and keep talking here. We got two more games to go. Next one's going to be Cleveland and Seattle. Right now, the Guardians are coming in as a plus 138 money line underdog here. Mariners minus 164, 7.5 is the total. I'm not even going to say it's the lowest total because technically all the totals are pretty much the same today. But it definitely is not a huge spot for run support. But let's talk about the pitcher matchup here. We have Gaddis and we have Ray. And I believe Gaddis is making his first career start today, and we probably shouldn't expect him to go too long. So let's go and talk about Gaddis and these Mariners bats first.
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to Hunter Gaddis, I think the spot is interesting. The Seattle team's so loaded, though. It seems like a real pitcher's duel last night when it all came down to it. The
Yep.
upside is certainly there for Gaddis, but I think I will lean away. I'd rather watch Gaddis and kind of find out exactly what he's going to do here and find out what type of pitcher he is. I think you can throw out last year's statistics. I know he wasn't a very good pitcher in his limited time. He only had 40 at bats against, or he only had 40 plate appearances against batters, but 9.38 xFIP. I don't think that's all that important. I think what is important is kind of seeing how he develops into this season. So I don't know.
Mhm.
This is a tough matchup to go against. Like you have a really good lineup with Seattle, so I'm not sure where to hold it. But I think I'm just throwing Gaddis out the window today and not really considering it on my side of thing.
No, I mean I'm not considering Gaddis. I think the more important conversation is how much exposure do you want to the Seattle Bats and where do they rank for you? We've already kind of talked about not loving Houston, loving bits and pieces of it, and we've talked about the Mets not loving it, just liking certain specific spots, and all the spots for Houston and Mets have been stud players that are expensive. So Seattle's going to come in with a 4.3 live implied team total. It's 0.2. I mean, apples to oranges kind of stuff. Like it's very, very close between San Diego, LA, and Seattle here. So I think that Seattle, outside of Julio, is going to be somewhat unpopular to talk about today. So unless you disagree, but I think that there are definitely spots we can take a look at for Seattle. Again, it's going back to something you mentioned. You said that you didn't really want to look at too much historically for Gaddis here. So how does that play into tonight?
Yeah, I think in terms of hitters, I'm mildly interested. I am worried about like the studs that Cleveland can roll out with this bullpen. I mean, this bullpen is back to being one of the most dangerous in the MLB. They got Class A back there. They got a whole bunch of studs when it comes down to it. So, not sure I'm necessarily excited about targeting against Gaddis, but I understand there's upside behind Julio Rodriguez that I think you can buy into. Ty France had quite a night last night where he hit really well. I think he's a guy that I could buy into. And then maybe you just go 1-3-5, go with one of the best catchers in the game in terms of hitting and Cal Raleigh, and I think you might have a solid stack there. But I wouldn't be willing to go that much farther past that.
Again, back to the mantra of maybe not stacking too many teams, or
Yeah.
it's kind of feels like a pick and choose your spot kind of night. Where yesterday, very much heavy on the top stacks. Which, by the way, screw the Twins. We don't have to talk about that from yesterday.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm on the same page as you. I think Seattle's going to be a fun team to play. Pick and choose your spots carefully tonight. So we'll have that prepared for you guys. On the, I guess the only thing I wanted to mention maybe is just looking at some Seattle props here, but I'm not sure how much is actually on the board. So let's take a look.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of Seattle props for hitter fantasy score, this is usually what I like to just check first. Julio's at 8 hitter fantasy score. Ty France at 6.5. I like that 8 number, man. I would love to see who the pitcher is going to be that this Cleveland team rolls out. But if it's going to
Mhm.
be Mike Zunino again, there is a ton of upside here. Zunino was not very good on the Rays last year when it came to his pop time. Maybe he improved over the offseason, but he just wasn't a very good pitcher. And Gaddis is the guy who throws in the low 90s. So again, we're just going back and back to that steals conversation because I posted about it today. If you're early to this steals conversation compared to everyone else, which I think we incredibly are, I don't think many people are considering this when it comes to DFS. I think there's chatter about it, but not necessarily
Mhm.
translating into plays. If you're early to this stuff, you're going to make a ton of money to start out this year. And I think a great way to do it is continuing to attack these hitter fantasy scores. Julio's going to be one of those guys for me at 8.
Yep.
I like that number. I like the steal upside. If he gets a single and he gets a steal, that covers. You're pushing at that point, and then everything else is gravy on top. So, really like this Julio number at 8 on Prize Picks.
Yep. Underdog does not have a fancy number, but if they did, I obviously would take that as well. And who else has some speed? I mean, it's pretty. I mean, I know that. Yeah, it's pretty much it from there. I think in terms of that, I think that's yeah.
Kalenic got a
Teoscar
steal
Hernandez in
last
this
night.
lineup now.
Kalenic got a
Yeah,
steal
Kalenic
last night.
is
So
he's an interesting guy to look for to start the season. We'll see if because he had a really really nice spring. I know he was awful last year, and he's been technically considered a bust from here moving forward. Obviously, it doesn't help when Julio Rodriguez is like the next god here coming up
mhm.
in Seattle. But Kalenic's interesting. Be curious to see where he sits in the lineup today. But he is 2,700 on DraftKings, which could be one of like on a slate that there's not much value in. There's opportunity there. So I'd be interested in seeing if there's anything listed for him. I don't think there would be, right?
In terms of fantasy score, no, but in terms of DFS, maybe you're taking it there. Teoscar is a top 100 speed guy in the MLB, so maybe Teoscar factors into things. He's at 6.5 fantasy score. I kind of like the number, so I wouldn't mind going there. Where is he going to end up in the lineup? Is he going to be 4 hole?
Yeah, looks like it's projected right now with him
Yeah.
at the 4.
I don't mind that. I think that's solid enough to get him in the 4. If you go 1-3-4, I think that's pretty good in getting Ty France in there in terms of like a DFS stack.
Oh, it's so gross if they have Colton Wong hitting second in
I
this
know.
team.
You need a lefty somewhere,
Uh,
though.
yeah,
They got
you're
a
right.
lot of
You're
lefties at
right.
the bottom.
Yep. Okay. Seattle, where do they rank for you? Can you call them a 3
I think
in
so. I
terms of top
think,
overall teams?
yeah, I think I can call them a 3 as of right now.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the Cleveland Guardians side and talk about Robbie Ray here. Let's start with Ray first. He obviously had a Cy Young campaign in 2021 and then kind of fell off last year. I mean, he has blow up tendencies, but he's at the end of the day a really, really solid guy with strikeout upside. Obviously gives up a lot of hard contact to the right-handed side of the plate. But we know that Cleveland doesn't strike out, and they're going to have some guys at the bottom of the lineup that definitely do strike out. Mike Zunino, who used to play for this team, and then obviously RAS is, if he's in a lineup, going to strike out a lot. So, but the first 6-7 batters all have K rates under 20% outside of Oscar Gonzalez. So, how are we approaching the Robbie Ray spot? It does feel like he'll be quite popular tonight.
Yeah, I could definitely see him getting ripped up by this Cleveland team. I mean, we already know Cleveland is kind of not that free swinging esque team, so I'm perfectly fine with staying away from Robbie Ray. The industry has always loved playing him, and I think this is a spot where I could see him hitting a lot of unders tonight. I think that pitcher fantasy score of I think it's around like 33. Let's go check where it's at. Pitcher fantasy score of 30 on the dot. I could see him hitting the under there. I could see him getting to a spot where gives up a lot of hits, isn't able to strike out many of these guys. You only have a few guys in this lineup with over a 30% K rate. That would be Arias, Zunino, and then also those are the only two over 30. Then you have Gonzalez at 23% from last season against lefties. But you can see a lot of guys getting good contact, and we know when Ray isn't able to strike out anyone, he gives up a good chunk of home runs. So maybe that's what we see from Robbie Ray to start out the year.
Yep. I think that this could be a really, really interesting spot for Jose Ramirez, who has been on the bad side of being a total embarrassment on the internet today. They were highlighting that knuckle curve from yesterday, and he
Oh,
completely swung and missed and fell into home plate. a just awful look there. So hopefully he's going to redeem himself tonight. I could see Jose Ramirez being a guy that goes yard today.
Yeah, I can buy into it. I think the spot is solid enough. And J-Ram, also a speed guy. So I wouldn't necessarily attack
Yeah.
against Cal Raleigh. Much better in terms of his pop time. And then you also have Robbie Ray, who has a pretty quick pitch rotation, and he's a lefty, so it's just going to be harder to steal on him. So I think the steal stuff is probably limited to the other side. 6.5 fantasy, good for Ramirez. I think that's fine. I wouldn't even mind taking. Well, he's a walk guy, so maybe you are taking fantasy score intent of like total bases or something.
Yeah, the hits, runs, RBIs, total bases stuff is a little tricky. Like obviously, if he gets a home run, he clears that, but
Mm-hmm.
or even an extra base hit, he clears that. But I think that you know, based on the stolen base stuff, like the number is 8.5 on underdog, and you're getting a 4 on the stolen base stuff. I think the value is probably better on Prize Picks.
He's an 8.5 fantasy score on underdog.
Underdog. Uh huh.
He's a whole 2 points lower on prize picks. That's insane. I would take it
Yep.
for the value case alone. Let's
Yeah.
go see if he is. I just want to. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just want to. Yeah, 6.5 fantasy score here. What an insane discount to get. I'll take that
Yep.
6.5
And the
any day of
stolen
the week.
base number is higher, like we talked
Yeah.
about.
Exactly. We talked about that yesterday. All right, Jared, we're running short on time. We got 4 more minutes. We got
Yep.
one more game. Anything else in this one? If not, let's move on and cover this last game, which I think should be pretty easy to sum up.
Yeah, if you're looking for a nice underdog bet to sweat out late night, I think that you can take the Guardians at plus 138 today.
Ooh, I like it. Solid. Very solid. Okay. Let's move on. Let's talk about this last game.
Last game, Diamondbacks, Dodgers. Merrill Kelly's on the mound for the Diamondbacks, plus 164 on the road. Dustin May gets the bump for the Dodgers here, minus 196, tied for the biggest favorite with Nick Martinez. 7.5 is the total here. This is the only other game that's outside today. Besides San Diego, there's cool temperatures and a light breeze blowing out to right center field. Saw the Dodgers come back into form the other day. The only one that didn't do well, which honestly sees Merrill Kelly the best, is Mookie Betts. So do you think that he gets back on track today? And say anything you want about Merrill Kelly. I know that you have some nice things to say there.
Nice. It's a love-hate relationship. You know, he's treated me well in the past. He's also done me dirty too. So it's definitely love-hate with Merrill Kelly. He had a really good spring. I talked about this a lot yesterday, but WBC guys, guys who played in that World Baseball Classic, I feel like they're coming in more prepared than anyone else. Especially when it comes to a pitcher, like you're facing off against a high level of competition instead of facing off against like minor leaguers like you would in spring training. So I feel like you're just coming in more prepared, which definitely scares me on the Merrill Kelly side. The problem is this
Yeah.
Dodger team just rakes, and we know, especially early on in the year, that this Dodger Stadium gets a little bit more hitter friendly. I like this spot. I think that against Merrill Kelly, I have mostly interest in the lefties over the righties. So Freddie
Uh-huh.
Freeman's of the world, the Max Muncy's of the world, even maybe a David Peralta play could be a guy that I look at. But lots of interest in this Dodgers team. I think that they are solid enough to where willing to take some of these guys, and this would probably be my number one stack on the slate.
Yeah, I'm not. I agree with you. I think that if you are bullish on, it's very simple. If you're bullish on the Padres not being able to keep up again for the second day in a row, then the Dodgers should be your number one stack, and I have no issues with that at all. I think that it's a little bit too early to like. I know I said that the Arizona Diamondbacks would be a team I'd talk about a lot. Tonight's probably not going to be that night.
Probably not. Yeah, I can agree with you there. Not really interested in this Diamondbacks team. I will also say not very interested in Dustin May. I want to see how he looks coming off of the injury. I know he came back last year off of the injury and pitched a little bit, but had a big injury to deal with. So I don't know. I'm kind of in a wait and see mode. I really like this Arizona team. I think they're one of the quickest teams in the MLB when it's all said and done. They've got a ton of speed all around. So they could very
Yep.
much look like the Orioles, where, you know, Orioles stole 5 bases last night, or I guess yesterday during the day. You could very well see this Arizona team do the same thing. I wouldn't say it's in this spot against Dustin May. May's got a heater. He's got 98 miles per hour on that fastball. Will Smith, also a pretty good catcher, but something that we can look out for when this Arizona team moves on to the next series or potentially gets a better matchup somewhere else.
Sure. Definitely don't mind taking a look at the Diamondbacks from that perspective. There's also just risk in general. Like we know that Dustin May has extreme upside, but we know that there's risk in a Dave Roberts spot where it's early in the year, and I know that burned us last year with the Clayton Kershaw like complete game or whatever he got, or like he got taken
Yeah.
out in the ninth inning.
Yep.
Anyway, though, that off topic, but I don't know if we can guarantee him going more than 5 innings today.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I don't think you can bank on that either. All right. Jared, I think we're all the way through. Any other final notes on this game? If not, let's get out of here, man.
I have a little bit of interest in Christian Walker. He was like one of the only guys that did pretty well for Arizona yesterday, but probably not necessary today.
Yeah, I have interest in the Walker spot as well, but I'm going to save that for behind the paywall because that's where it is. It's behind the paywall right now. So, anything else for you, Jared? Freeman at 6.5 fantasy score. We'll take that last question real quick and then move out of here. I like it. You're not getting the steal upside, but you are getting any potential
Yeah.
walks that he's going to get. Um, I might be on 1.5 total. I think the way that I'm going to operate this year is if they're not a steals guy, unless they're like a very heavy walk guy, I think I'd rather take the total bases number instead because you can get a double out of someone like Freddie Freeman at that 6.5 number. It'll give you 5 points for the double. It won't hit his fantasy score. But if he's in a solid spot, I'd rather just take the 1.5 total bases. And if he gets a double with that total bases, it covers.
Yeah, I think I'm in line there. Yeah, I think that you can find if you're getting other things besides total bases, there are. I mean, obviously we felt really good about Ozzy Albies yesterday. That ended up coming through, but when it comes to other plays, it's kind of a case by case basis, and usually you can find a little bit of a better prop.
Yep, for sure. All right, let's get out of here. Thank you all for listening. As always, we have a lot more content coming out today. I'm going to be streaming a little bit later, closer to lock, covering MLB and some of the props that I like on my channel over at No Rhyme or Reason. But before that, we have an NBA show to go cover. Big old NBA slate today, which is going to be fun. We are going to be off camera for that one, which is a little bit of a relief because it's tough being on camera for a whole show, especially for 3 hours. But get a little bit of a break here, get to cover some NBA with Jared, and get to rock and roll in that aspect. But Jared, any other final thoughts? If not, we'll get out of here, man, and we'll be back on Monday.
Just like I said earlier, lock is at 6:40 p.m. Eastern time today, so it's going to be a half hour earlier than normal. And yeah, it's going to be a little bit of an adventure trying to tackle two sports, providing back-to-back stuff, but we got it in us, and we've done it before, so we're ready to rock and roll today.
Yes, sir. Exactly. All right. Thank you all for listening. As always, my name is Joshua Reimer. And as always, good night